All right, so we're kids in Damascus, Virginia, and little boys get together and decide they're going to find out who has the coolest scar, right? And who's been through the worst bike wreck. And I had one on my arm and one on my leg, and a story about jumping off a ramp and getting the handlebars hung in my belt loop, and that was a nasty spill. And another kid's got a scar on his leg. And then another kid walks up and takes his hat off and has no hair because he's been going through chemo for leukemia. So let's talk about that as it relates to suffering. I'm Zach. This is The Average Christian, just a project about what it means to live the everyday Christian life. So we're exploring truth. We're trying to look at it in practical ways, livable ways, and also debunking and dispelling myths about Christianity that are even held by us and misunderstandings as well. So welcome. We're glad you're here. If you're listening to us on a podcast, please consider subscribing, rate, and review us. That lets other people know that we're out here. It also gives us feedback. If you're on YouTube, thank you for joining us. And if you haven't already, subscribed to the channel and hit the notification bell. That lets you know when new content comes out, usually once a week on Thursdays. And also like us. If this video helps you, share it with other people. Leave a comment if you want to give us some feedback, or if you have topics or ideas of things we can cover. So let's get into this. Hebrews chapter 12, the idea is about suffering. And if we had a series called How Not to Be a Victim series, which our culture needs, our American culture needs, because it seems like it's a sport now to figure out who can be the worst victim. Well, you and I need to be held to a higher standard. As I've said before, this channel is generally directed toward Christians. So we hold ourselves and should hold ourselves to a higher standard. And one thing you can't do is act like and think of yourself as a victim. And so I'll try to make one point out of this while reading. If you go back and read for context's sake, a lot of people call Hebrews 11 the faith chapter. And so you have all of these different examples of people who by faith did so many things from the Old Testament. And then it goes on to talk about how there's not enough time to talk about all these other people who suffered all of these great things. And then as we move into chapter 12, he uses these. In fact, he calls them a cloud of witnesses. He uses these examples to make a point. And I'm going to try to get you just one point for this video here. Since we are surrounded, he says, by so great a cloud of witnesses, all those from chapter 11, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus. There is your key. And as it relates here, when you start to think that you're suffering too much, or you've gone through so much, look, and I know these people, and I may have been this person at times as well, but they're always talking about what they've gone through. And it's almost like a competition, or they talk about it in terms of a competition. They've gone through this, they've had to endure this, and this has happened to them. And all they can seem to do is talk about their examples and their life. And I've seen these people in classes that I've taught, and all of everything relates back to them in some way because they feel like a victim. And this covers so many areas of that mentality. But getting back to the point here, and the way to get past that is to look to Jesus. When you think about what he suffered and what he endured, and I'm actually just now going to bring in another passage here in a minute in Philippians chapter 2. When you think about all that he endured, that sets your standard. And he says here in the ESV, the founder and perfecter of our faith. These sufferings, these difficulties, these hard times are all opportunities to grow faith. Now, it's not fun to go through. I'm not going to diminish what you've been through by saying you just need to be thankful and look at it as an opportunity. But at some point that has to kick in, that this is an opportunity for me to grow. This is how Jesus lived his life. He suffered the entire time he was here in so many ways. And he's the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him, that hope, that joy, he endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Verse 3, consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself. Now, you got to take a minute and think about that. I won't open that up too much except to say this. Who did he come here to save? Romans chapter 5. He came here to save sinners. Who is he enduring the hostility from? Sinners, people, the very ones who can't save themselves. Jesus is here enduring so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. That's the point. Consider what Jesus went through so you don't grow weary, so you don't grow faint-hearted, so you don't fall apart, so you keep in mind what the goal is. And continuing on in verse 4, in your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. That's the real fight. Along the way, we lose people, we grieve, we're done wrong by people, we go through hardships, our lives are flipped upside down by a variety of things. Whatever the case is, if we're lucky enough to live long enough, we go through and we hurt. And yet the biggest battle is still sin. He says, in your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. Here's the main point of the video. You don't have the market cornered on suffering. It could be worse. I'm not trying to say that to comfort you, but lest you stop and think that my life is so difficult and my life is so hard and look what I've gone through. You got to go back to Jesus and look at him, because you can always see somebody who struggled and not deservingly so. You could say I could say I deserve to suffer because of what I've done against God and so forth. That's not really the point here. More importantly, Jesus didn't deserve anything. God has never deserved anything negative or anything difficult. And yet he put himself in that situation. Now I go back to Philippians chapter 2 to bring this point home a little more. And I don't know if you've broken it down like this, and I may use this at other times. I don't think I've used it yet in a video. Paul is begging these people in Philippians 2 to get along, to put each other first, and then have this mind in verse 5, in you as Christ also had in him. In fact, it says, have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who though he was in the form of God, take that for a minute. You think of the rich young ruler who he told to sell everything, give it to the poor, and follow him. You're talking about giving up everything. And of course, the rich young ruler went away sorrowful. Before he ever told him to sell everything and give it to the poor, Jesus had already given up more than he ever could. He gave up his being in the form of God, or completely God, and his place with God the Father and God the Spirit. It says here, that he did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped. I like how the ESV brings that out or translates that, because he's not white knuckling, holding on to his position. You know what I mean by white knuckling? If you're on a roller coaster, you've ever been on one, you've probably had white knuckles from grasping so hard at the bar. That's not Jesus having to be torn away from heaven. Having to be torn away from heaven to come here and do what he volunteered to do. He gave it up willingly, came here. Now, you put that in perspective and take a minute to think about what all Jesus gave up just to come here. And then you go to verse 7. But emptied himself. That is a life goal, right? Another translation said made himself no reputation. Another translation says he became nothing. Now, which one of you watching this video right now says that's my goal in life, to have no reputation, to empty myself and become nothing? And that's exactly why Jesus came here, to do nothing else, not to work a job, have a career, build up a reputation, have power, prestige, any of those things. He came here to empty himself. Why? To take on the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. Once again, going back to what I said earlier, he comes here in the form of the very beings who can't save themselves. And he doesn't come here as a king. He doesn't come here as superhuman, as a superhero. He doesn't float everywhere he goes. Contrary to some of these terrible paintings, he doesn't have this white aura around him everywhere he travels. He's not pretty even. He's just ordinary. He's regular, as we say down here in the South. So people don't even know he is who he says he is, that he's the Son of God. He's actually God walking around on earth, and he's doing all this in order to save, again, the beings who can't save themselves. That's enough right here so far. In verse 8, it continues. Being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on the cross. He just came here to die, not just any death. He had to suffer along the way, and then he had to suffer the worst death probably ever recorded. All of that voluntarily doing so. Now tell me, you have the market cornered on suffering when you consider Jesus. And that's the point, is for you to have perspective and me to have perspective, and to never, ever, ever feel like I'm the victim in this. So at the end of what sounds like a negative lesson, what I'm hoping is you'll look at Jesus and you'll see all of these things that help you put your life, what you're going through, what you've dealt with in perspective, and say, it's well worth it. And I'm going to keep going on. I have a joy set before me and a hope set before me. And that's the point.